Hey guys, what's happening? Thanks for tuning in, coming back and watching. I appreciate it. Hope you're doing really well. I also hope you're staying safe and healthy out there. I'm doing my best to do that as well. And so far, so good. Let's stay strong, my friends, and healthy, because that gives us time and energy to edit photos. And that's what I'm here about. If you're new here, I edit photos. I'm Jim, and I just love to edit photos and make videos about it, share tips and tricks and insights and things like that. Today I'm in Luminar 4 and I'm playing around with a beach shot that I took in Oregon during a sunset. And as I was working through this, I realized there's a number of different tools that I use repeatedly on skies in particular, which is the primary focus for this photo. And I wanted to kind of walk through a workflow, show you how I use them. And in this case, I use quite a few of them on the sky, but there's also some additional ones that I frequently use on skies, but I'll talk about those as well. So let me show you the photo. Here you go. It was a lovely sunset along the coast in Oregon. Just a quick snap, not a long exposure. You can see the waves breaking and all that. Kind of bluish tint, and just a nice shot. Nice to me. I took it. I'm a little bit biased, but that's the base photo, and that's my finished photo. And as you can see, I went for color, which is, if you're new here, I go for color. I just love color. And if you're old here, not old, but you know what I mean. If you're a previous viewer, you know that I like my color. I really like color, and anyway, so I went for a lot of color there. I also went for some contrast. I went for some other things. So let me reset these filters, and then we'll walk through how I got from this photo to that photo. Okay, the first tool I use is the light tool, and here I am. There's my base photo, and there it is after using the light tool. You can see I did a very minor temperature and tint adjustment. Honestly, if I reset that, you might not even notice because it's so minor, but that's usually the first thing I do on a sunset. And be clear, this one I have a sunset and I'm kind of accentuating that. But as you can see in the base photo, a lot of that warm light was gone. And as you saw in the final photo, I brought a lot of that back. So a little bit of temperature and tint, a little bit of smart contrast, brought down highlights and shadows. If I hit the J key, that turns on these little triangles up here, which are the blown pixel and the dark pixel indicators. It lets you know if you've blown out some highlights or got some complete dark blacks. I hit the J key. I don't see any. You would think that these areas are completely blown out, but they're not, which is kind of nice. And I have to be honest, if there's a little bit of section of a sky that's a little bit blown out, it's not going to bother me. In the past, I shot HDR all the time, and I always try to get light perfectly balanced, no blown out spots, nothing too dark. But now I'm a little bit looser. I don't know what the word is in terms of my approach. Like if there are some of those kind of things in a photo, what I would consider an imperfection, I don't really care. It's real, and there's nothing wrong with it. And I think in some cases it actually adds to the photo. So it doesn't bother me here. It looks kind of blown out. I don't really care. That's my thinking. The next thing I did was go to AI Enhance. And as you can see there, that added quite a bit to it. AI Accent's a great overall sort of. It does some toning for the highlights, midtones, and shadows, but it also does a little bit of contrast, which, by the way, makes the color pop a little bit. So I use it all the time. In fact, it's probably one of my most frequently used sliders or tools in Luminar, but I definitely want to be careful with it depending on the image. If I'm starting with something really dark, I'll use it more heavily, but here I used it kind of gently. And then I used AI Sky Enhancer, so I went from that to that. Now it's getting a little bit blue, and that's where I kind of want to go in and start to do some customization here in a second. Actually, the next thing I did was AI Structure, and here I just went -21. Structure is great at adding some crunchiness if you drag it to the right, and I do that on a fair amount of photos. For skies, I typically go left and will mask it in. But this photo, actually, there's landmass in the distance, and there's a little bit of beach, but the beach is pretty smooth. There's not any texture on it. It's not crunchy. It's not, like sand dunes or something where you expect to see or kind of imagine yourself walking through and feeling the texture. It's pretty smooth because the water has been running up over it. And so I just went for AI Structure Negative to soften up the entire image. I don't do that all the time. I usually mask it in, but 80% or so of this photo is sky and water, and that's where I like to use AI Structure. And because the beach was already so smooth, I just went across the entire photo. Okay, next up was color. And here you can see, let me turn that off, lots of blue and quite a bit less blue. So I took down the saturation. I know it's kind of hard for me to do and even talk about. I reduced saturation. It's not a normal thing for me. I do like saturation, but I really like vibrance better. So I took saturation down, added a little bit of vibrance, and then over here in the blues, as you can see, I took the saturation down quite a bit and lifted the luminance. And that was really the big shift in this tool. If you look at it before, a lot of blue there in the sky, and I like blue in the skies. I think it looks great. But it was getting a little too heavy for me, heavy-handed maybe. The other thing is, if you look across where these waves are breaking, those white caps, they start picking up that blue tint, and I just want to be careful. I want to make them a bit more white, and so I took the blue saturation down. I still think there's plenty of blue in the photo, and I'm going to go now work on the warmth. The first thing I do to work on the warmth is Landscape Enhancer, and I get Golden Hour, and you can see that gives it a nice little pop of brightness. Let me show you one more time. There's before and after, and that was 33 on Golden Hour, so a fair amount. I mean, a third of the way. It only goes to 100, but regardless, it gives a nice pop, and I use that a lot on sunsets. It's great at overall warmth and toning, if you will. So something I love to do, and that's why it's another filter I use quite often on skies, especially if they're kind of sunset skies. But I also use it a lot on other things, non-skies, like if I'm trying to warm up a scene. It I think works well for that as well. Okay, next I'm going to the Creative tab, and I have to get Mystical. I love Mystical. It just gives you that nice little bit of moodiness. It brings back a little bit of shadow and contrast. Let me show you the before. If you look at the clouds and the beach, and then after, the clouds are a little bit darker, the beach is a little bit darker, so it's kind of like adding contrast, but it also, I'm turning that off again, and then on again. You can see it brightens up some of those bright parts, and I love that. I like having that contrast in the sky, and it's one of the reasons I like cloudy skies, because you can get some really dramatic looking stuff out of it, and I like dramatic photos. It's just kind of fun. So Mystical is something I use a lot. I didn't use Glow on this photo, but Glow is another one I like to use on skies. That soft focus bright, when I drag that, you can kind of see what it does. It adds a little bit to the sky, which I think is nice, and also soft glow is kind of nice as well. There's that before and after. Again, I didn't use it here, so I'm just going to hit reset and make sure that's off. But Glow is a tool I like to use on sky. It does pop some of those brighter parts, and generally speaking, the sun's in the sky, therefore it's brighter, therefore Glow kind of works there. Okay, next to the Portrait tab, and you guessed it, I'm getting Orton, which I love, and it adds, it's kind of, to me, it goes well with Mystical. They're fairly similar, but it adds a little bit more of that contrasty shadow and a little bit more pop in the bright areas. So there's the before and the after. It also softens up the image a little bit, kind of giving it a soft focus, which to me works really well on skies and also works well on a photo like this, where I'm kind of going for an overall softer kind of painterly mood. So I think that one came in handy and it's helped to accentuate the look of the photo. Now I'm going to go pop over to Pro tab and wrap this thing up. Okay, two filters I did not use on this photo but like quite a bit. The first one is Advanced Contrast, and I've done videos about this before. I'll try to remember to put a link up there, but you can see how that's adding contrast, and it's great how it isolates it based on tones, highlights, midtones, and shadows. So you can see that can really have an impact. And by the way, I've said this many times in videos, when you add contrast, it will increase the look of colors because it's going to pop some of those colors. So you can see how this highlights contrast has impacted the colors. Again, I didn't use it on this photo, but I like it quite a bit. Midtones, there's an example, and shadows. That will actually lighten the shadows here. And then you've got the balance sliders. I'm not diving into this tool in detail. It's a great one. I highly recommend experimenting with it, but it's definitely one that I consider using when I'm adjusting skies. The next one that I didn't use here but would consider using is Adjustable Gradient. Same kind of thing. It's powerful. It allows you to separate top from bottom. You can set the orientation as you see fit. In this case, I would probably take the orientation and maybe collapse it a little bit, and then maybe drag it down to where it kind of gets a little closer to the horizon, maybe something about like that. And then, come in and do the things you want to do. So in this case, I might add some warmth to the top and maybe a little bit of vibrance. And then maybe pull up the shadows a little bit, maybe pull down the highlights, and maybe even bump the exposure. Just experimenting. I didn't use it on this photo for my final finished look, but I'm just showing you what I would do. For the bottom, I actually might add a little bit more contrast. That sand is really dark. I kind of like that. It's kind of an anchoring element in the foreground. And then I would definitely go with some warmth and maybe a pop of vibrance, because it's going to help with that reflection and some of that water. Notice the water is picking up a little bit of a blue tint, so maybe a little bit more of the warmth. Let me show you what this tool has done to the photo. There's the before adjustable gradient and after. Again, I'm going to hit reset because I didn't use it here. Very powerful, very much worth experimenting with when you're using it, when you're editing skies. Okay, the next one is Color Enhancer, and I did use this one here, and this was my final tool. There's the after. I used a little bit of brilliance and warmth, as you can see there, and a little bit of split color warmth, and they're both fabulous. I love Color Enhancer. I have done a video about that as well. In advanced settings, you get into the color balance. I did not use that here, but I highly recommend it. You could come into the highlights and maybe add a little bit more warmth or maybe a little bit of magenta. It just depends on what kind of look you're going for. I'm going to hit reset because I don't want to do that in this photo, but it gives you so much control over the color. Again, I didn't use the color balance here, but I did use Color Enhancer overall with brilliance and warmth and split color warmth. So there's the before and the after. That got me to my final image, but there's one more filter, and that is split toning. I use it on skies all the time. I'm actually, when I got to the end of this and was done and was happy with my result, I was a little bit surprised with myself that I didn't use split toning, because it's super amazing. It lets you take highlights and shadows, separate those, and pick a color and then a saturation level for each. So in this case, highlights, I might want to bump up that warmth a little bit more. So you just move the hue to the appropriate color there under highlights, and then saturation. I'm going to push this really far to exaggerate it. You can see what you can do, but it gives you a lot of control because it's just hitting the highlights. So it's going to be those lighter parts in the sky and in the reflection. And then shadows, you might come over here and put a little bit of blue and maybe drag that up, and that's going to cool off some of those darker areas. So I might do that and then maybe warm up some of these brighter areas. And you can see it's having a nice impact on the photo. Here's the before. That's before split toning, and after. It's just a little bit richer. I didn't use it here, but that's just an example of how I would use it. And sometimes I might use split toning and maybe just a couple other tools, and that's all. I don't always use, I think I used 8 of these tools on this photo out of, I think, 12. I don't always use that many, and I don't recommend doing that necessarily. It just depends on what you want to achieve. In this case, stacking them and getting, edit on top of edit and that iteration, I think got me to the final result that I'm happy with. And so there's my before and my after, and I'll give you this sliding window here. It's very different. It's definitely moody. It's kind of painterly, and it's something that I like to do, but I just wanted to walk through some of the major tools that I use to make the skies kind of pop in my photos. That's kind of how I go about it and how I went about it specifically on this photo. Hope it helps, my friends. I do appreciate you watching. Stay safe out there. Tune in again soon. I'll be back with more videos. And take care of yourself. I'll see you next time. Have a great day. Take care, and adios.